Greetings from across the Pacific. This is Boyce Brown with my comrade in arms, Mark French, collectively known as Ahead of the Curve. And today we'll be investigating how to save democracy, why we won't, and why we're doomed. How you doing, Mr. French?
So great to see you. Always great to put our chats available to the public. So I'm alive and healthy and well, which is a shocking surprise in 2024. When I was a kid, I was Jetsons fascinated by flying cars and all the other fun, cool stuff that was supposed to be happening in my country, the good old United States. And all of it has been stunted and turned out not to be the case. And I don't think I've ever felt more gullible and stupid in my entire life. But away we go.
We not only lack the Jetson flying cars, the only thing America exports anymore are planes, which don't even fly any longer.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start to look at some of the reasons why that is, why we are so completely effed. One would surely be the explosion of money in politics. And we got some elements to pull up here. Let's have a look. The amount of spending in politics is astronomical. And it just continues to skyrocket completely out of control. Let's look at some of the most expensive Senate races ever. In Georgia, which was a swing state extraordinaire upon which the balance of power of the Senate rested in 2020, one of them spent over $600 million. The other senator spent well over $400 million. And as you can see, that these races are well into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Even in Montana, where the home of the post-orthodoxy show, which is in hibernation, we hope it revives soon. Even a state with as few inhabitants as that can spend almost $200 million in 2020 to elect their senator.
I mean, it's so to see that is kind of funny. I just lived in Western Montana for 5 years recently. And the guy was from New Jersey, Greg Gianforte. So one thing about your chart that's abundantly clear is how much more expensive these races are getting contemporarily. So time and when it happens matters, right? But why are people spending $500 million in Montana? Like, it's a really big place. There's only 1 million people there. They all know each other and they don't like outsiders. So why are people spending this much money buying seats? You just showed Georgia like twice, and Carolina. Like, who's making $600 million in Georgia besides the estate of Ted Turner? Like the Carolinas, heavy Army, old Marine training base, heavy Navy, like, of course they're doing well. Those are the rednecks above Virginia that we don't have to pay attention to, and they're willing to fly everywhere to murder everyone. So, I think it's a good chart to show people. They should be paying attention to these graphs and pie charts of where their money is going and why.
Yeah, my mom is from both my folks are from North Carolina, and sometimes she gets.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Hawaii, but they're from North Carolina, and my mom gets, "Oh, you're from North Carolina? Oh, my family spent some time in Fort Bragg."
Immediately, yeah.
So let's look at how election spending has just skyrocketed over the years. 2008, the federal spending in the election looks to be about 50 some odd million, a billion, no, 5 some odd billion. 2012, over 6 billion. 2016, a little more, over 6 billion. And 2020, it doubles to well over $14 billion.
Yeah.
So when senators and Congress people are so beholden to the donors, I think we can safely say that Congress represents the donor class and not the people any longer.
Yeah.
And ever since Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and Joe Biden, back when he could speak English,
Yeah.
back when he wasn't crapping his depends, they were part of the Democratic Leadership Council that tried to achieve campaign fundraising parity with the Republican Party by basically aping their pro-business standing. So that led them to outspend the GOP. And here's another chart about how the balance of spending between Democrats and Republicans since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it's kind of roughly equal over the 4-year cycles. But then 2020, the Democrats heavily outspent the GOP by a considerable margin. Now, there's a guy, Rick Nolan, quoted in a CBS story. He's a representative. Well, both parties have told newly elected members of the Congress that they should spend 30 hours a week, Mark, in the Republican and Democratic call centers across the street from Congress, dialing for dollars. Because they're not allowed to use their federal offices for any campaign activities. So they literally walk across the street to just sit in phone banks and dial for dollars. But if you're doing that 30 hours a week, when do you have time to read the legislation or write the legislation?
I mean, anybody that's had to do telemarketing the last 20 or 30 years or knows someone that does, it's one of the most uncomfortable, creepy things on the planet Earth. Like, Americans, they know what they want to buy or what they need to buy. They're literally inundated with it 24 hours a day, every conscious waking moment of their life. So most normal human beings' reaction to when they answer the phone to a stranger in 2024 is to go, hello, who are you? What do you want? I don't recognize this number. Okay, click buy. Like, so the idea that our politicians are doing that for a living is seriously preposterous. And everybody knows that's not really what they're doing. Their call list is already vetted. It's already been given to them on purpose. Their schedule's already filled out. So the reason I was excited to listen to you go through this piece is just to expose how bad this is. I think one positive that will come of Gaza and Ukraine is going to be just how bought and paid for. These people literally don't have to decide anything. They won office. Their offices were bought for them because they already had their agenda laid out. And I think that's been laid bare. And I think normal people are going to kind of start getting hip to that. One thing that's been fun about being able to listen to Vladimir Putin talk so much over the last few years, which I've already been listening to the guy for 25 or 30 years. Well, maybe not that long. He started in the KGB. I didn't know who he was. But once he was made public, I've been listening to that guy talk and the people that are around him. So one of the fun things that he said in the last year was, I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to in the United States anymore. Their puppets are politicians, to the point where even their president is a puppet. The last president that I actually respected was probably Bill Clinton, and even he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And that was almost 30 years ago at this point. So he laid bare, these people are bought. They're not nationalist. And they don't really have a lot to say. They're only allowed to say so much. So away we go.
I don't think there's a person with 20/20 vision or corrective eyeglasses, hearing, or the ability to overcome hearing deficiencies that still believe, and a mind that works, that believes Biden is running the show. So then who is it? Is it Blinken or Sullivan?
I think it's the Obama people. I think from what I've seen this last 4 years, I think it's this weird amorphous amalgamation of mostly Obama people, because the Clinton people are just too old at this point and they've been shoved out, and the Clintons lost to the Obamas. So I think they take a back seat. So I think it's this smashing together of what Obama says, along with the leftover Clinton people that are still around town and respected, along with the Mitch McConnell Republican side that doesn't want to give in to the populist Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene. They don't, like a broken clock, the Southern evangelical Republican, Pizzagate, Epstein, like a lot of what they say is ridiculous, but half of what they say really is based in truth. So I think those people have their finger on the pulse. The average Republican south of the Mason-Dixon line will tell you this thing is corrupt. It's got to get burnt to the ground. So, but to answer with specificity what is going on right now, it's clearly not Biden. Give me a break. It really is Blinken, Newland, Sullivan, and the Clinton Obama people, either on the secondary level or behind the scenes or from the think tanks or in the NGOs or the funding. I think it's this weird, that's how he got put into place in the first place. Obama literally had to step in to stop Bernie Sanders from winning that nomination. So everybody agreed Joe can still speak English, kinda. He's going to sniff some hair. He's going to lick some ice cream cones, but we just got to trot him out there. And that's what they did.
Well, there are still some important Clinton world people in the Biden administration.
Sure.
Neera Tanden, former president of the Center for American Progress. I don't know exactly what her role is, but she's deep in the administration somewhere. And John Podesta, who I think was also a chair of the Center for American Progress, but in any event, a longtime Democratic insider. And he is responsible for dispensing all the infrastructure bill money. So there's some Clinton world people in there, but I think people like Blinken and Sullivan, who are really intellectual mediocrities, rise to the positions of power that they do because they have spent decades in DC and adapted themselves to the groupthink and the implicit cues given off by the Beltway bubble, the Beltway consensus, what Andrew Bacevich calls the Washington rules. So they know who butters their bread, but also what to say in public. Mm-hmm. We are just so concerned by all these poor civilians, then stop giving them goddamn JDAMs to Israel. But also, to get a chair for the important committees, you have to reach certain fundraising targets. And there's even virtually prices on these committee chairs. I don't know what the figure is exactly. I'll just make a wild ass guess. Say you have to raise at least $10 million for Democratic super PACs when the Democrats are in power to get something important like banking, foreign relations. So if you're fundraising for 30 hours a day, when do you ever have time to read the legislation, write the legislation? You don't. You just receive it from the lobbyists and submit it as they wrote it. So let's look a little bit at the trends in campaign spending. 2012. According to the data compiled by MapLight, successful House members in the 2012 cycle raised an average of $1.6 million, while senators raised $10.4 million. Now, 2022, the median amount raised by a sitting senator for a quarter, the third quarter of 2022, was $1.5 million, $16,200 a day.
Yeah.
That is quite a tally. Now, on the House side, July 2, September 2021, the median amount raised by a member of the House of Representatives was $323,000 or $3,500 a day.
Yep.
So in 2012, they're raising $1.6 million for House members, $10 million for senators, and they're raising astronomical amounts just in the quarter in 2022. So I would argue, changing the topic, that we need public financing of elections.
Sure.
This seems like one of the most fundamentally simple things we can do to even begin to hope of returning democracy to the United States and some sort of representation of the people's interests in Congress.
Yeah, I agree.
Because if they're raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for a House race, or over $1 million, and over $10 million for a Senate race, that's a lot of money. So you're completely beholden to the donors. So what if we did something like every House member gets $250,000, every Senate candidate gets $500,000? You know, we can debate the figures, but something enough so that they can get their platform out, do some media buys, do some and have the opportunity for unearned media or unbought media, and enough for everybody, but a level playing field for everybody.
I mean, it's one of the things that I enjoy about talking to you about this stuff. And it's one of the reasons I think you're still relevant in this space. To me, the Ralph Nader thing seems completely plausible. I think a lot of people are just completely apathetic. I think one of the only things that can make politics in the United States relevant again for most people is what you just said. I completely agree with it. If people look at the money that was just lit on fire with the things that objectively Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, it's regardless of how you feel about Gaza or Israel or whatever, if you just take the money that was spent on Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, three things that by any measure you have to admit were not efficient at best,
Or abject failures.
Or abject boondoggles. Like, yeah, you were literally, a failure and you were lied to. So how could that money be better spent elsewhere? So yes, I think so. One of the things that you bring up about public finance and overturning Citizens United, to me, being a Thomas Paine variety patriot and someone that feels lucky to be born in the United States and someone that is a nationalist and someone that does believe in at least the effort to continue the project, I would agree. A dollar is not a vote. A human being that's allowed to vote in the country, that should be the vote. So the more we can get into that, I think it would serve everyone much better than what's been happening since the time that a dollar is a vote.
I agree. Since you brought up Citizens United, let's jump right into it. Citizens United was a case before the Supreme Court in 2010, in which, quote, this is an NPR article, the court decided that political action committees were able to take unlimited contributions from donors, except for nationals and federal contractors, widely known as the Citizens United decision. It allowed corporations and nonprofits to spend money on political campaigns and explicitly back a candidate as long as they didn't directly coordinate with candidates. So they ruled that campaign spending was equivalent to speech, and therefore First Amendment free speech rights obtained, even for corporations. And I think the factoid is about 92, maybe 95% of all members of Congress and the Senate have their own PACs. So you try and tell me how disassociated the campaigns are from the super PACs. Let's have a look at how many super PACs there are. 202,476. That's as of a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How much money did they raise? $2.7 billion. How much did they spend? $1.3 billion. So these super PACs are sitting on a bundle, an absolute bundle. And that's why we saw the spending rise double from 2016 to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's something really cool. This is called the Oye Project. All of our 5 listeners are heartily encouraged to go listen to this. If you're a Supreme Court nerd, this is all the audio oral arguments. It's audio of all of the oral arguments and a lot of background to the case. And they have it going back decades. When I was getting my PhD in educational policy, there's a lot of fascinating cases in education that went before the Supreme Court, like Wisconsin versus Yoder in particular, which established the kind of minimal amount of schooling that was required by the federal government, 14, 15, 16 years of age. So that's a fun resource for Supreme Court nerds. So unless we overturn Citizens United, which we could have done when the Democrats had a supermajority, but the duopoly are both wings of the duopoly are equally delighted with the amount of money they're able to raise. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they're going to overturn it.
No, it's going to be double tax. No.
So now we could look at the revolving door between K Street and Congress. K Street is a metonym or a synecdoche. K Street's a street, DC, but it's also just the past. It's a euphemism for the lobbying world as a whole. And it seems like these members of Congress, senators, Congress, you have to run every 2 years. So you do 2 or 3 terms, you learn the ropes, you know the players, you know all the chairs, you know the calendar, the legislative calendar, you know what the factions are at any given moment. You know it from the inside. And instead of making, I don't know what the average Congress member salary is, let's say $150,000.
No, there is no. It's all over the place. There's places like Texas that only pay like $7,300 a year or whatever. So they bake corruption directly into the cake. Most of the people are lawyers or business people, obviously. So they're literally sent to do the state's business, which when you're paid that little just means you're walking in gland handing people. So I'm glad that you brought that up. There is no average. The pay rates are wildly different. So someone that actually wants their politicians to actually do work, they can get paid $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, which is absolutely nothing. But then you have places like Texas, Michigan's kind of in the middle, 14, 15, 16, something like that. Just ridiculous amounts of money. If Americans see, which they already should, how ridiculous this structure is, we need to adopt the Singapore model for a little while. Pay these people $500,000 a year. It's way worth what you're going to get stuck with on the backside. You send someone to office for $7,500 a year, you're basically guaranteed they're going to stick you for as many millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. They're going to stick you on the backside. If you give them $500,000, you could end up saving yourself tens of billions of dollars if they don't have to do the revolving door thing that you're talking about. It's really bad. Like, it is preposterous to give a congressperson $7,300 a year as a salary. Like, that is not even what they charge for 5 hours as a lawyer in their own private practice. It's ridiculous. It's probably what they charge for 2 hours as a lawyer in their city, in their own private practice. So the idea that you're going to salary them at that for a year and they're just going to be totally fine with that because they want an Eagle Scout badge and they're just your buddy, give me a fucking break. Like, wake up. That's silly.
I would be surprised if it's that low at the congressional level. I would certainly imagine state lawmakers have highly variable salaries. And I think the Texas state house meets every 2 years.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. There's a minimum threshold at the federal level.
Yeah, I think there's probably a base salary for everybody that's probably pretty consistent at the federal level, and I would imagine it's low 6 figures.
Yeah.
And surely at the state legislative level, each state compensates their own state representatives and state senators at varying levels. But let's imagine that senators and congresspeople get low 6 figures.
Yeah.
They do a term or two in Senate, 2 or 3 in Congress, and then they go out and they make 4 or 5 times as much money as a lobbyist. So they're they're not there to do the district's business or the people's business. They're there to learn the ropes to then become lobbyists and make a lot more money than they made in private practice. And you're right. Most of them are lawyers. I think it's somewhere around 70%, 75%.
Yeah.
They're almost all lawyers, and it's about 65% millionaires. So they're all rich lawyers who smell money and know that if they just serve a few terms, they can go out to K Street, buy some Gucci loafers, and make 4 or 5 times as much as they made in Congress. So they're not only beholden to the donors while they're in Congress, they then serve the donors and the corporations after a few terms.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have a law that just disallows people from being lobbyists after serving in Congress, let's say for 10 years or something, so they can't capitalize on it right away, or forbid it entirely, because that is a very poisonous aspect of why Congress doesn't represent us anymore.
Yeah.
And these corporations and these donors are paying pennies on the dollar for what they get back.
Yeah.
If they make a $10,000, $20,000 donation, bundle some other big donors, throw some money to super PACs, add it up to 50 grand to 100 grand. It doesn't even need to be that high. And they're going to get the vote they want. That will give them corporate welfare to the tune of hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at return on investment, $50,000 for $500 million return, I want that person that can get those kind of returns to be my financial planner.
Yeah. I spent some time at the world's biggest bank, and any of us would have paled in comparison to what Nancy Pelosi is able to do. And she's not the only one. There, I think, is 63. There's 63 congresspeople and senators that have way outperformed some of the best market investors on the planet Earth to the tune of sometimes 210%. I don't care what your political affiliation is. You don't have to spend a lot of time listening to Nancy Pelosi talk. If you think she's the best trader on the planet Earth, I hate to break it to you, you're fucking stupid. But she's one of the best traders on the planet Earth. So I think, one thing that I really respect about your work, you've published so many books and you're so respected in the academic space. You are always really polite and careful because you're so adjacent to these people. I'm never going to be accepted into that club. So I'm willing to say, when you look up the returns of the people in the Congress, in the Senate, as someone that personally trades at a high level whenever I feel like it, and has spent a lot of time at the world's biggest banks, it makes no sense that these vapid, vacuous morons that have never done that for a living outperform typical market structure by more than 200%. If you believe that they're just that smart, you're stupid.
There are apps that track which members are outperforming the S&P or the Dow Jones Index. And there are Twitter accounts that track insider trading by members of Congress. And there's always about 20 to 30 people that are significantly outperforming Dow Jones Index and the other indices of the major stock markets.
If a normal person did what Nancy Pelosi has done the last 15 years, they would be in a federal penitentiary.
Well, what did she say? That because we're serving democracy, we should have the right to enjoy the fruits of the free market that are supported by democracy.
Yeah. It's capitalism.
It's capitalism. What do you got a problem with that for? So let's look at the history of lobbyists. Since 2008, spending on lobbying in the United States has averaged $3.3 billion per year. And this is an old figure. I'm sure it's gone way up. There are an average of 12,000 active registered lobbyists in the United States, outnumbering members of Congress by 20 to 1. You can't swing a leather briefcase without hitting a Gucci-wearing lobbyist.
Yep.
Now, here's a bunch of quote blocks from one of my least favorite magazines that occasionally has a good article, The Atlantic. Corporations now spend about $2.6 billion a year on reported lobbying expenditures, more than the $2 billion we spend to fund the House and Senate.
Yeah.
So lobbyist expenditures that's reported are more than it costs to run Congress.
Yeah.
And that began in the early aughts. Back to quoting The Atlantic, today the biggest companies have upwards of 100 lobbyists representing them, allowing them to be everywhere all the time. For every dollar spent on lobbying by labor unions and public interest groups together, large corporations and their associations now spend $34. So unions and public interest groups, the voices of the people, we can talk about union corruption, but to some extent, the voices of the people are being outspent 34 to 1.
Yep.
Of the 100 organizations that spend the most on lobbying, 95 consistently represent business. Now let's look at it historically a little bit. Back in the 50s and 60s, political representation towards well-off lobbying was almost balanced by today's standards. Very few companies had their own Washington lobbyists prior to the 1970s. To the extent that they did lobby in the 50s and 60s, typically through associations, they were clumsy and ineffective, making this one of the most important transformations in American politics over the last 40 years. So up until the 60s, they didn't exist, basically. And the AIPAC lobby and the Israel lobby didn't start growing until the 1967 war.
I know, but that's one of the most beautiful things about your work. It's because you lay things out for people in such a plain black and white way. All they have to do is match up with the math and structure and details that you give them along with the day, and then go back and read the headlines of what was actually happening. So yeah, Mearsheimer's book on the Israel lobby, people should read it. It does matter. Absolutely.
Co-author Stephen Walt.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and then the other thing that matches up with those dates, why was it discombobulated? Because the mob and the government was still separated at that point. So American normies don't understand when they blew your president's brains out on national TV, you no longer had a government that represented you. Like that's, so you had the deputizing of pirates and the mafia. The reason no one talks about the mob anymore and there's not Valentine's Day massacres in Chicago, it's because the Pritzkers are the fucking mob, and they run Chicago. What all they did was allow the mob to move into a rubber stamped government office. That's why you don't hear about John Gotti. That's why you don't hear about the mafia. Your government is the mafia. These people are robbing you blind.
Yeah, I think it's universally agreed upon by anyone that looks into JFK assassination at all that it was that Oswald was a patsy, as he declared, and that it was some coordination between powerful elements of the mob, New Orleans, Chicago, Miami mobsters, intelligence, CIA people, and anti-Castro Cubans and Texas oil billionaires. And the CIA has long been an arm of Wall Street and the oligarchs of America, less so than serving the executive branch, to the extent that they'd whack a president. And Bill Hicks has a great joke. He did it in Bill Clinton's voice, where he said, yeah, you know that when someone gets elected president, they bring him into a smoky room and they pull down the projector screen, and you see a new angle of the Kennedy assassination from a new vantage point that you've never seen before. And the president turns to them and says, or they look at the president and say, any questions? The president says, just what my agenda is.
That's
First we bomb Baghdad. You got it. So in Kennedy's case, it was the oil interests working with the mob and government. But now it can be big pharma. It can be any of the last remaining sectors of American oligarchs. And the CIA continues to serve Wall Street more than it even serves the executive branch. So what was one of the precipitating events to make lobbying so, the rise of lobbying so sudden, so dramatic, so all prevailing? It was the famous Lewis Powell Memorandum in 1971. 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard. So many important things that happened in 1971.
Yeah.
WTF1971.com or .org has dozens of charts that shows what a incredible turning point that was for America. And we are just living in the shockwaves of what happened then.
Yep.
So in his memorandum, a prominent Virginia corporate attorney, Lewis Powell, said, as every business executive knows, few elements of American society today have as little influence in government as the American businessman, the corporation, or even the millions of corporate stockholders. If one doubts this, let him undertake the role of lobbyist for the business point of view before congressional committees. Well, that struck so many business leaders and politicians as a good idea that Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook.
Yep.
And in addition to me not being a crook, hey, Louis Powell, would you like to be a Supreme Court justice?
Yeah.
So I think basically on the strength of this legendary memo, Powell got elevated to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And it was not only lobbyists. That's when such leading business organizations like the Business Roundtable was formed in 1972, a year later. Because, you know, Nader was explicitly mentioned in the Powell Memorandum, and all of his efforts for consumer rights and consumer safety were seen as a major thorn in the side for the businesses. And the Congress responded to public pressure and Nader's efforts with a lot of regulation and whatnot. And in the 60s and early 70s. So after that memo came out, it was a set of marching orders, and American business responded. And one of the things that they created was the Business Roundtable, which later went on to be one of the major corporate backers of education reform, like standards-based education, that they maneuvered in a way that would serve business. All right, Brother French, voting machines. Evil or just horrible? They can flip votes. Their code is proprietary intellectual property and can't be audited.
Mm-hmm.
They have hackathons with teenagers that can get into voting machines.
Yeah.
Some are already connected to the interwebs. And some companies say, well, ours aren't connected to the internet, so we're good. Well, it connects when they start tabulating.
Yeah.
So there are numerous entry points for anyone with advanced intermediate level technical sophistication to break in and swing these votes.
Yeah.
In 2004, this was an issue. The Secretary of State of Ohio, which was such an important swing state in 2004, was, I think, on the board of Diebold or some sort of corporate officer for Diebold. I mean, conflict of interest much?
Right.
Unbelievable. And I did a little research. So whatever happened to Diebold? Well, it was bought by ESS. So they didn't kill the dragon at the gates. They just another one of the oligopoly that have an oligarchy of voting machine company.
Yeah.
They just bought Diebold. So the brand name went away, but their corporate structure was just integrated into the largest company, ESS.
Mm-hmm.
So to reform this, I think is some very simple things. We need to do it with open source coding so everyone can audit it. We should perhaps use the blockchain and distributed ledger technology so that it's a public record that is unable to be messed with. But neither party seems to really take this issue to heart. And I haven't heard the public outcry either in the way that we heard it 20 years ago, Mark.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's wild. I just voted in the primary. It feels like only a couple of months ago. It's really, really hot outside now. But I feel like I just voted. But yeah, it felt sketchy and hackable, and there have been incongruencies. And whenever you listen to these 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds that already have one foot in the grave at a congressional hearing of some sort, whenever it has anything to do with a computer, it's embarrassing how little they know about computers. Like, I'm a middle-aged person that doesn't know a lot about computers, but it's not my job to know anything about hardware or software. I'm not a public servant, and it's not what I do for a living. So when I hear, politicians talk about these things, and they're asking the CEO of Google about things that are happening on Facebook, or they don't even know how to access their own email. Like, you brought up Podesta earlier in this talk, and he was directly connected to the crew that paid for the completely fake Steele dossier and Trump's fake Russian pee tape. Like these people do not know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. Every other sophisticated country on the planet Earth has figured out how to let their citizens vote directly from their phone, virtually. It doesn't matter. The blockchain that you bring up, highly relevant. There's a way to do this without causing any type of fraud or security concerns. Voter fraud in the United States is actually kind of fake when it comes to actual human beings going out of their way to commit voter fraud. What's happening on the software or the actual machines, it seems kind of in danger and sketchy. It seems like a problem.
Yeah, very sketchball. There's so many points of entry to manipulate the voting tallies
Yeah,
at the machine, at tabulation, in the source code. And if we can't have public inspection of every link of that chain, then we have no reasonable reason to believe that the voting systems are having any integrity.
exactly.
And I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I only talk about the ones I bring receipts on. And I think the elections of 2020, giving the election to Biden, as argued before various courts in the United States, something like 60 plus cases found for Biden. Okay. And I'm sure a lot of those, since the Federalist Society, the reactionary right wing lawyer organization that has 6 people on the Supreme Court, I believe,
Mhm.
have infiltrated the judiciary in every level. So, of those 60 courts, I bet they were probably at least even Democrat, Republican appointees, maybe even more were Republican appointees. I don't know.
I don't know.
But even though I haven't looked into it, I wonder if Biden was given the election not only because of the contact list on Obama's iPhone, but because of voting machines. I
Yeah.
don't know. That's not a hill I'm going to die on, but voting machines have to be made more publicly accessible.
Agree. And the only thing that I would push back on about what you just said is the term conspiracy theory. It's not a fucking conspiracy if it happened. Like, that is a tool that has been bludgeoned over people telling the truth for so many decades now. It comes from the media, it comes from the security state. The big D and little d Democrats are so beholden to the alphabet soup agencies. They have a favorable rating of the CIA. Like, how, what? Like, how, what planet do you live on if you think the FBI and CIA and Google, which comes out of the security blob, like, these people are on another level, man. You have to be really, really petrified and naive, or you have to directly be on the take to say stuff like that. Like, if you're getting paid from the New York Times, God bless you. I hope I get that level salary and invite to the club at some point. But I mean, the things that these people espouse are honestly completely disconnected from reality and totally ridiculous. And voting machines are a part of that. I won't die on that hill either, but I'm extremely skeptical. Seeing the actual turnouts and the states that it came from, I'm very skeptical that Biden actually won that election. I really am.
I'm skeptical. I won't die on the hill of the Biden campaign in particular, but I will die on the hill that voting machines are a big part of these issues that we've been discussing that prevent the people from having representation in Congress and make us democracy in brand name only.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was a memo, it's been declassified, from the CIA saying, let's call everyone that disagrees with the Warren Commission report on the JFK assassination a conspiracy theorist. So the very term conspiracy theorist came from the CIA to cover up their conspiracy to whack JFK.
Yeah.
And now, since big tech, Meta, formerly Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, since they donate something like 95%, their employees donate, them and the corporation donate 95% to Democrats, corporatist Democrats, DNC Democrats. It's big tech and the platforms they provide, intelligence, because they're not that bright, and corporatist Democrats all colluding together to manage the narrative. And they've got the Mickey Mac to support them, what Ray McGovern called in his expansion of the military-industrial complex, the military-industrial congressional intelligence in Mickey Mac media, academia, think tank complex.
Yep.
And in previous shows, we've added the big private foundations, the big law firms in DC and New York, and the dark money sources, and a few other sectors. So that's their first line of defense against keeping the oligarchy and the intact and keeping the fact that we are democracy in name only away from the people.
Mm-hmm.
But then their second resort is also their last resort, physical violence, which is why we've seen them crack so many skulls on campuses protesting the first live stream genocide in human history.
Yep.
When people are holding up headless bodies of their children or just the upper half of their children.
Yeah.
Other just atrocities beyond belief. And Gaza's a moonscape, and they're even bombing them in the tents that they've fled to in places that were declared safe zones. So now let us move right along to gerrymandering, which is another way that I think democracy is being drowned in a bathtub in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Gerrymandering first came about in early 1800s, very early 1800s. And there is a district in Massachusetts, and a political cartoon in a Massachusetts paper of that time that imagined this bizarre district that didn't really clearly represent a neighborhood or a district, but was designed to make Mander, who I think was lieutenant governor at the time, running for governor, perhaps, I may have it off, and his slate of candidates to support him in that run. I believe that was the deal. So then they just kind of, they played with the salamander animal and called it a gerrymander, and then it became gerrymandering to make these funky districts that don't really represent discernible neighborhoods. And okay, that's about 1815, around there. Well, the Velvet Hammer, Tom DeLay, made some very weird districts in Texas too. Mm-hmm. In 2008. Look at those districts coming out of Austin. Okay, Austin's that little orange one right in the middle. That makes sense. That's Metro Austin. Mm-hmm. But then look at those districts going north-south out of it, a little to the east. They get down to the census block area. Yeah. Census block is about, a 5-block area.
Right.
They crunch data to that granular detail to create districts that are then secure for whatever party did the districting until they redistrict in. Mm-hmm. And this is a bipartisan shenanigans. Democrats do it too.
Yeah.
So then it becomes almost impossible for people to compete because they have got the voting records down to such a fine level of detail. So for my money, that's another element that we need to get rid of if we are to even think about having democracy again. Any thoughts on gerrymandering, Mark?
Not really. I've lived in Texas, or I've been working here for a long time. So the amount of chicanery that happens in this place, one of the fun things about your work is it kind of tiptoes around things that really need to be addressed. I think the biggest question that you ask all the time of people that continue to care to participate in this place is, do you know what's happening right now? Do you know why it's happening? Do you know where it came from? What are the symptoms? What does it smell? What is its flavor? And what can you do about it? So, yeah, I have very strong feelings about Texas gerrymandering because I've had to live here for so long. So the amount of time that these people will spend to purposely continue to bifurcate their neighborhoods, college educated, white, black, Hispanic, like, this place is founded on so much murder and kicking people off of their land in the first place.
And using buffalo soldiers, black people, as the buffer between the white settler colonizers and the Indians.
Yeah, so the other fun thing about here is there's so many flavors of it. The wildcatting mentality made its way into the 90s bubble. Like, this is Enron and WorldCom comes from here. Like, the entire country suffered from New York speculation backed by Texas. The other weird thing is the whole Bush Jr. 9/11 thing. The Bush family is like from Connecticut, and Prescott Bush, you have strange baking relationships there. But the Taliban was invited to Sugarland, Texas, a very fancy private suburb of Houston. Like, the highest ranking members of the Taliban were flying to Houston 30 years ago to discuss what was going to be happening. The entire Kennedy assassination, the rich Jews that LBJ was connected to in the oil industry, Texas had a hand to play there. So, I mean, you can go on and on and on. Yes, I have very strong feelings about gerrymandering in Texas.
George W. Bush was so tight with Kenneth Lay of Enron that they called him Kenny Boy.
Yeah.
And what good fortunatory that all of the SEC documentation in this were in World Trade Center 7 when it collapsed, even though it was not hit by one of those aeroplanes.
Yeah. I mean, they were so successful.
Enron, World Crossing, Global, all those .com blowouts.
Well, and they've been so successful running that story. It's to the point where people think Ann Richards and Beto O'Rourke were like some kind of communist leftist. Like, Texans seriously think that like Ann Richards or Beto O'Rourke is like a Marxist. That is how good they've run that playbook down here. It's crazy.
When Beto first arrived on the national scene, I was far out. Gen X, former punker, a skater, All right. You've got my attention. What do you stand for?
Real estate speculation and tax giveaways.
Gentrification of El Paso? Is that good enough?
Yeah. No, seriously.
Gun
Yeah.
control because of that Walmart mass shooting?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do I stand for? But I skate. Skate and create. Skate and destroy. Thank you, Repo Man. Scenes from Repo Man. All right. Skate.
I know me and my wife and kids need more money. I'll definitely ride a skateboard again. I'll dunk this
viral video of him
basketball.
skating in the iconic Texas chain Whataburger. Him skating mediocrely in the parking lot of a Whataburger. Oh, he's such a Gen X skater. All right. So those are kind of, to me, some of the biggest reasons that why we do not have democracy, and it exists in name only.
Name only.
There is a fancy term in social sciences called path dependency.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at some of the definitions from Wikipedia, which is useful for things that aren't politically sensitive, in which case it's a crock of shite. Path dependence is a concept in the social sciences referring to processes where past events or decisions constrain later events or decisions. I would say constrain very heavily. It can be used to refer to outcomes at a single point in time or to long-run equilibria of a process. Path dependence has been used to describe institutions, technical standards, patterns of economic or social development, organizational behavior, or more. So, institutions, organizational behavior, institution, Congress, organizational behavior. Sucking that donor cock. So path dependence is just a fancy way of saying things tend to operate the way that they have operated in the past. It's kind of a social science version of the physics law of inertia. Things will continue going in the direction and speed that they've been going unless hit by a countervailing force or immovable object.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Congress people, the public, mass media, legacy media in particular, cable news and former papers of record, New York Times and Washington Post, that are now just imperial court stenography. And Washington Post lost $100 million last year, and their own editor said, no one's reading anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do is chop it up into bite-sized bits and put it on TikTok. No, they're not reading it anymore because it's bullshit.
Right.
There's been a massive disassociation of the people from giving a shit about Congress because they know it doesn't serve them anymore. It serves corporations and the donor class.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the exact factoids, but a large percentage of people that are eligible to vote don't register. A large percentage of people that are registered don't vote.
Yeah.
It's a little higher in presidential races. I think 40% of registered voters vote. In by-election years, I think it's closer to 25%. So there is a vast reservoir, a vast amount of people that can be mobilized by candidates that respond to the issues. Because, MSN circled the wagons and Obama made a few phone calls to keep Bernie out.
Mm-hmm.
But his actual policies were polling at 70 or 80% positive.
Yeah.
Medicare for all, ending military imperialism, right down the line. So it's not far left and America needs to govern from the center. That's all bullshit.
Yeah.
They are popular policies. And the Greens couldn't get on the New York ballot. Cornel West couldn't get on the ballot. Down to the state electoral boards, the duopoly does everything in its power to prevent any candidate from arising that can mobilize tens of millions of disaffected voters.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I don't think, even though we've itemized all of these items that are preventing us from achieving democracy, that we ever will.
Right.
And on that grim note, I think we can bid a fond adieu to our 5 dedicated listeners of Ahead of the Curve.
Yeah, you did a good job, man. It's a fun story to tell. You are one of the people laying it out that makes it sound possible and maybe even probable or plausible. Like all the Virginia people, all the New York, Portland, Seattle people, like they're all about to get hit with such bad inflation. There are couples that have 1 kid or 2 kid or no kids, and they feel broke because they are in that much danger. Like your 2020 inflation calculation,
Yeah.
that is so real, and it's going to get so bad. They're going to have to bend the knee and admit reality soon. So I think if people do want to put their hand on the gears and they want to pretend that this place is a democracy and they have something to say about it, I mean, what are you waiting for? I think so. So when you have these conversations, I think they do a lot of people good, and I don't think people have a choice but to get on the hamster wheel and start running. Like it's participation matters. Like if you stay quiet and asleep and you just watch what's about to happen and you just let it happen to you, you'll probably have some very serious regrets when you're taking your last breaths and croak. This place does require maintenance. I think people have taken a vacation in this country from serious civic duty and politics since the late 60s. And I think you're seeing the result of that. Um, Having to listen to complete soft marshmallow, defunct, total idiots like Sullivan and Karine Jean Pierre and Kirby, and watching Joe Biden stumble around like a fucking Roomba every second of his life when his meth that they shoot him up with starts wearing off. I mean, what else do you have to see or listen to know that we're being outclassed by every other serious country and culture on this entire planet? What Americans and Israelis do not realize is the rest of the planet Earth does not have to live under your propaganda. Everybody else knows and hears and sees what is actually going on. So if you want to be the one fucking moron that thinks the only thing that you see and listen to is what is happening, I mean, whatever. Maybe ignorance is bliss. I don't know. I'm not the one to decide that. But what I do know is the rest of the entire planet Earth is moving forward and the United States is not. And I love this place and I believe in it. And I feel lucky that I'm from here. But this is not going well. Like, the country needs people like you to continue to have these conversations and tell the truth, man. I appreciate your time today.
People like us, powerful Mark French. And our 5 devoted listeners should get a refresher course on what the 20-20-20 formulation is. This is a model that I came up with that we're going to have $20 a gallon gas, 20% inflation, although the inflation rate is already, if they use what they were using in 1979, it would be double what the official figures are now. So we're already we're closer to 20 than we are to 10% inflation now. And 20% interest on T-bills because no one's going to want dollars.
Right.
And the first line of defense for the oligarchy and the donor class is narrative management through collusion between the corporatist Democrats, intelligence, and big tech.
Mm-hmm.
After that, they have what they have been exporting to the world since after World War II and even earlier, but certainly since the founding of the national security state with the National Security Act of, I believe, 1949, which created the CIA, National Security Council, et cetera, et cetera. What they were exporting from then till now, violence. That's all we export. Hyper-violence and planes that can't stay in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Their second line of defense domestically is what they've been exporting abroad, violence. That's why they're cracking skulls on all of these campuses that are appalled by the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
But I saw one sign that gave me hope, powerful Mark French, at these campus protests. It said, you fucked with the wrong generation. And there's going to be outliers like us and Gen X or millennial and even a few boomers that are going to join Gen Z to try and resurrect the hope of democracy in the United States of America, which still has to deal with its original sins of the theft of a nation and the genocide of the original indigenous people and slavery. But let us return to democracy, or first begin democracy for the first time before we begin addressing those before we begin addressing.
Yeah, you just said it. We never had one yet.
Yeah, people say socialism never works. Well, maybe it's never been tried before.
It's never been tried before.
Anarchism never works. Well, it worked for 7 years in Catalonia, and every side of the upcoming World War II ganged up on them to destroy them as a model.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, Boyce Brown and Mark French ahead of the curve bid our 5 listeners a fond adieu.